Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Today we're going to be talking about desperation, apathy, screams into the empty void of nothingness with no response. These feelings have surrounded the community around this war, the Russian community around this war, because Russians have been non-stop crying about the potential sellout of Russia to the United States. Yes, you heard me right. It's not only us that are supporting Ukraine here are being overly worried about what the deal between Russia and the United States could bring. It's also the Russians. So we're going to look into that and give you a whole new perspective. But I must start with something a bit different. Because yesterday we marked 3 years of Russian full-scale invasion into Ukraine. Not the start of the war. The start of the war was 11 years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time. And since then, since the full-scale invasion in the last 3 years, the costs for Russian gamble in Ukraine have skyrocketed. And this chart specifically demonstrates the scale of those losses. And they are stunning. Not every country in the world can even closely consider to have even half of what Russia has lost already. But more importantly, it also shows us the immense capability that Ukraine has to fight this war. And I want to remind you how it all started. This was the first message that described the Russian losses, how it all started. The first things we found out, the first costs that Russia sustained for their invasion into Ukraine. And with that announcement, basically we saw that the Russian plan was already failing. What they were hoping and what they were expecting is that Ukrainians will just bend over, fall over, and just run away. That didn't happen. With all of their tactics of shock and awe, they landed in Kiev, where, for example, this CNN crew actually famously met the Russian forces just setting up their firing positions around the Hostomel airport. They were expecting it to be a walk in a park. Now, there is a lot of speculation that it was supposed to be a 3-day operation. That is not true. They were expecting that it's going to be 11 days, I believe, for the main part of Ukraine, and then it's going to be cleanup operation. But the thing is that all of their bet was that they're just going to come in and Ukrainians are just going to run away and no one is going to answer with anything. This was not the case. Instead, what Russia got much later is pain, suffering, and more pain. And if anyone for a second thinks that this is already done for Russia, that no more is coming, I have really bad news, and we're going to cover them today. The news that United States and Russia started negotiations for a potential end to the war have been met in Russian media space and society with the least, I can say, unease or worries, because they saw that what Russia was fighting, a lot of these Z patriots, the motivated people that want to exterminate Ukraine, they fight for the fact that Russia needs to be independent from the West. That the whole point that Russia was on its knees was because we were bowing down to the West, bowing down to the United States. And now, supposedly, there is already negotiations underway, and worries that Russian media and Russian Z propagandists are spreading is that, well, are we gonna give up on what we've done? What have we been fighting for? I'm gonna read you a couple of messages so you can get the perspective from the first hand, so to say. For example, Romanov Light is writing here that after 11 years, the US realized that handing out cookies in Moscow is more profitable than on Maidan. We are waiting for an article about discrediting American-Russian relations. An article here is a mistranslation. What he meant is a criminal code chapter, referring to the fact that there is a criminal code chapter for discreditation of the Russian army So when you're on public media and public space are speaking bad about the Russian military, or you're discussing the losses of the Russian military, you actually can get criminally prosecuted. And he's stating that we're expecting that soon there will be additional criminal code changes for the prosecution of stating something bad about the American-Russian relationships. And obviously the cookies here are referring to the popular propaganda narrative that Victoria Nuland that came to Maidan and distributed cookies were obviously the 100% proof that Maidan was fully sponsored and made up by the American deep state, and Ukraine has always been an American puppet. Then the Z propaganda channel Two Majors are writing, frankly speaking, we slightly missed the moment when the evil desire of the damn Yankees to steal Russian natural resources once again became the prospect for mutually beneficial cooperation with American partners. While the foreign and other press is following the chatter of politicians and each other, allow me to casually and modestly remind you that the 1,000 kilometers front has not gone anywhere. Those mobilized in 2022 are still in units. What he refers to in this post is Putin recently coming out to the public media and talking that potentially there could be an agreement with the United States to use Russian resources and invest into the Russian resources, also into resources in the captured territories of Ukraine together with the United States. That was the Putin's proposition online. And while in our space it's perceived one way, in the space of the Russian Z propagandists is perceived as Putin is basically selling out Russia to our enemies, so to say, from the Russian perspectives. But we're gonna go more. German Sadulayev is writing, fuck everyone, I wish the war would end soon and the guys would come home alive. There is no more Russia. Such a yell in the void that I was talking about. He also writes, the war continues. With what feelings do our soldiers leave for the combat mission today? To die and be wounded? For what? Very obviously expressing that frustration that the Russian Z propagandists are feeling with basically all of their efforts to achieve anything in Ukraine are for naught, because they do understand that what they have done in Ukraine is for naught. They have achieved no major strategic goals. Now, they will continue trying to play the game. Obviously, Putin will try to sell that there's going to be political aspects. But for a lot of the Russians, stopping right now is basically giving up on all of the sacrifices that they did, and they feel it very, very much so. More importantly, for the guys that are fighting at the front lines that are politically charged in Russia, right now they're preoccupied with Ukrainians, but once they go back to Russia, then they already have been saying that then we're potentially going to have some talks with a lot of these politicians that are pushing this agenda. I don't expect them anything to do because Russians have no balls, but still, it's going to be an interesting aspect of the Russian society that's going to be coming back to Russia. And the most important is that they acknowledge the whole problem with making an agreement with Donald Trump. Because while Donald Trump right now is coming in with this more favorable angle to the Russians, no one is telling that once there is going to be a new president for the United States, that he's not going to just bend over Russia backwards and make them pay for any kind of good agreement with Donald Trump. They understand this, and they are big mad because of it. For example, a Russian channel, Verum Regnum, is being quoted here. Russia and the United States could launch joint projects for the extraction for aluminium, for example, in the Krasnoyarsk territory, Putin said. He noted that the project in the Krasnoyarsk territory would require investments of $15 billion. The PR campaign began, justifying the surrender of our national interest and flushing down the drain of the special military operation goals, basically what he's saying. And I could read you even more and more of them crying about the current situation. The problem with that is, I think is summarized firstly in this, is that oftentimes they're writing and formatting their messages like it's actual eye cancer. Just look at this. It's impossible to read. It's like we're going back to the internet 1.0 times, or like late 90s, basically. It's insane how they're still writing something like this. And then secondly is because oftentimes their perceptions and ideas that they're expressing are so wild and just unbelievable that I feel just stupider by just trying to read them. Like, just look at this picture. This is a picture from the one of the Russian Z propaganda channel. You can pause the video here, because the longer you look at the picture, the more questions you're gonna have. It's insane. Like, this is the absolute mush that is within their I cannot say brain, it's more like where normal people have brain, they have this sort of a mush. There have also been a nice interview, a pretty rare interview in English with Kirilo Budanov, where he answered some of the questions and his views on the war. And just once again, he underscores just how clearly Ukrainians are seeing the situation they're finding themselves in, and how clearly they understand that the bullshit Russia is feeding the allies and the world, and they understand that they need to take the correct positions. And he talks about the fact that Russia is an imperial state. He talks that Russians are not super dumb. Like, they still understand that in military aspect, because of this, there is pretty much no real option for Russia to win militarily. So he underscores that they want to continue pushing in the hybrid format, the military plus the political aspects. That's where they see their strength. And they see the window of opportunity of that strength with Donald Trump. They see that there is an option for Russia, for example, push for elections inside Ukraine to destabilize the situation inside Ukraine. And not in a sense that there's going to be elected a pro-Russian candidate. That is pretty much impossible. Whoever thinks that, again, he absolutely doesn't understand Ukraine. He doesn't understand Ukrainians. That's like a complete person that don't know what is happening there, like a test. Like, because Ukrainians will never elect. What would happen is there would be an internal divide, there would be a lot of the discussion, political divide, and that creates area for Russia to exploit. Remember, Russia, the modern Russia propaganda, they don't really create narratives. They don't create ideology. They look at the ideology of the people they want to undermine, and they will try to dig deeper. They will try to make that chasm between the parties larger. So, for example, if there are people that are hating abortions and there are people that are loving abortions, then Russia will sponsor both sides just so there will be a clash between them. We also got some news that Ukrainian departments have reviewed the updated mineral deal proposed by the United States and are in concept ready to sign it. There are a couple of questions that still needs clarifying, but generally there is a desire to sign the mineral deal. Importantly, guys, from me, if you didn't know, I am for signing of that mineral deal. I am for Ukraine and United States to be intertwined economically when there is a vested interest between Ukraine and the United States. I think this is a beneficial point. That is my position. You can argue that it's wrong, but I do think in ideal scenario, that would be a very concrete deal where Ukraine says, we're going to sell you resources, but you're going to provide us weapons. You're guaranteeing that you're providing us weapons. As far as we know, this is not so much. So there will be a fund established that will receive 50% from the future monetization of the proceeds of the selling or using or development of the Ukrainian resources, including natural resources, minerals, oils, gases, pretty much everything. And that fund will receive 50% of those proceeds. That fund will be then used also to inject additional investment into Ukraine. Notably, there has been removed two the most egregious parts from the deal, which were the 100% US ownership of that fund. It is now not in the deal anymore. And second thing that was removed is the 500 billion mark that US is going to continue sustaining this fund until at least the 500 billion mark is going to be reached, and then essentially US is going to get paid back for the help that it did. Apparently all of those egregious things are out, so now it's more about, for the things that are going to be invested for in Ukraine, United States will also get some profits out of that, and Ukraine will get benefits because there's going to be investments into Ukraine. Notably, that this deal exclude current Ukrainian capabilities. So all of the current operations of the Ukrainian natural resource companies, even the bigger ones and the smaller ones, are excluded from this deal. So whatever Ukraine is doing right now is not going to be part of the deal. But on the other hand, the deal also doesn't mention any specific security guarantees. And what needs to be still fleshed out is how specifically these joint companies, joint projects will be established. So those things are still yet to be decided. But those are like details that can be flushed out in the committees. Overall, as I said, my point always was that I think it's good for Ukraine to get a deal, to get US vested interest. I know a lot of people here don't want to have any deals with Trump. As much as I understand that, you also need to understand Ukraine. Because for Ukraine, if they lose the US support, then they will lose 20% of the weapon systems and military resource that have been provided to Ukraine. That is significant. That will cost actual human lives. So if the question is for Zelensky, is it human lives? Or maybe there will be future investments that you can then partially pay to United States? I don't think that's a very difficult question if you would be in his place. So I understand your feelings, but please also understand President Zelensky. Another part of the topic that was discussed was that potentially Starlink can be turned off for Ukraine. And the first news are that the Starlink already came out publicly stating, nope, it's a lie, we're not going to do it. But the second thing that came out in the Ukrainian media and more of the internal channels with the militaries is stating that Ukrainians, after Elon Musk has switched off some of those operations, they have been working intensively on securing secondary potential for communications. They are citing something like Kursk operation, stating that in Kursk, for example, there are no Starlinks that are working. It's the territory of Russia. Yet Ukraine was able to perform the operation, and Ukraine was able to, after that, to communicate, set up the observational post and so on. There are solutions that can substitute Starlink. It might not be as easy, it might take more effort, more time, maybe a bit clunkier, but there are options to substitute Starlink. Ukrainians have been working on this in parallel. But the main point why Ukrainians should feel more or less safe but that Starlink is not going to be there is mostly because the Starlink is profiting immensely for Ukraine. So far, the count that was said was that there is about 100,000 Starlink terminals operating in Ukraine, which is an enormous amount. I mean, it brings tens of millions of dollars every month. Insane amount of money. So for them to just say, we don't really need $10 million per month, that is not just saying they're shooting themselves in the foot, but it still is a bit of a stretch for a company to do so. And in general, I want to push back a little bit on the narrative that if United States will stop supporting Ukraine, then Ukraine will collapse in a matter of months. And it was not just me talking about it. I'm a YouTube guy. What do I know? Well, here is an ex-Ukrainian soldier that knows things quite well. He's now a proper military analyst. He knows what he's talking about. And he is been known to be pretty critical about what the Ukrainian military is doing. He was one of the people that have been always underscoring just how much issues the problems within the Ukrainian military are undermining their own operations, and that they could have fought against Russia much more efficiently if only those issues would be solved. And even he looked at this article that was published in Le Monde that stated that Ukraine will lose in half a year, and he stated that, well, actually not, that there is plenty of capabilities that Ukraine is doing on their own, that the battlefield right now is very much different than it was before. And a lot of the narratives that are being published by either Le Monde or other articles are actually from the people that have still no idea about Ukrainians, about the war situation, about the battlefield. They grab some news headline wise, maybe grab a soldier from one direction somewhere, and they build their whole cases on that lack of information. And I just want to have someone that really knows what they're talking about also underscore that no, Ukraine is now in a new battlefield, in a new situation, that while United States supplied a lot of the critical weapons a lot earlier in the war, the bulk of US deliveries last year was mostly ammunition, shells, and light vehicles that are necessary, but all of those will be missed. But that's not something that is impossible to substitute by the other countries. Another thing that came into question recently was the amount of deliveries of United States to Ukraine. Now, Donald Trump has started claiming that the US has delivered some absolutely stupendous amounts, whereas people like these, Economists for Ukraine, the public nonpartisan charity, they actually did a research into the numbers provided by the US, and they estimated that the total number of supposed deliveries to Ukraine was 65.9 billion. But actually, as they were looking in closer, they argued that it was actually only 18.3 billion of military aid that was delivered to Ukraine. First, the majority of US military aid to Ukraine has come in form of existing equipment from US stockpiles. When we track every weapon provided and consider the vintage of these weapons, their full depreciation, and the failure rates, the value is at least 60% less. Second, where aid considered of the new equipment ordered, the US placed significant limitations on Ukraine's choice of weapons and their use, and some of the equipment transfers have not yet occurred. Third, a substantial portion of the military aid was provided in the form of loans rather than grants. I think these are valid points to consider, and again, it plays into the general narratives. Have the supplies from the United States have truly been so irreplaceable as it's being claimed? Thankfully, the allies of Ukraine are not stopping. For them, nothing has ended. We have seen them all coming to the third year anniversary to Ukraine and supporting Ukraine even more. Canada is joining the countries that are participating in the Danish initiatives. The Danish initiative is where a country purchases the equipment from the Ukrainian weapons manufacturer, which is a great initiative because it basically quadruples that help. So let's say if 28 millions that would be spent for weapons production in Canada would be about those 28 millions, in Ukraine, because the labor is cheaper, a lot of resources are cheaper, and the way that are working is more efficient and wartime, then this sum brings not 28 millions in value, but 4 times that. So investments into Ukrainian production are super crucial. Moreover, Germany and the new German leadership that was just elected, and a lot of people argued that, Georgie, why are you celebrating? The new government is just the same party that was there before. And I agree with this, and I'm hoping that there will be more change. But the point is, we were really looking down the barrel of potentially the far-right alternative for Germany taking the first place, and that didn't happen, and there is a full availability for coalition government in Germany that will still support Ukraine. So the good news is not that it's the same old parties from the old apparatus that came to power. I still think there is a lot of work to be done. What I think is that the parties that are supporting Ukraine came to power in Germany, and for Ukraine, that is good. And they are already discussing that they want to increase their defense spending by 200 billion. That is pretty big, because so far, I believe the spending of Germany is about 86 or 90 billion per year on their defense. So I'm not sure if they want this package to be done in 1 year. My expectation is would be like this 200 billion package would be something like within 5-year cycle, 2025 to let's say 2030. But I obviously hope that it would be 200 billion in 1 year. And talking about defense, the picture has been shared by the Ukrainian armed forces. This is the new defense line in the Pokrovsk direction, where the city of Pokrovsk is right on the front line. We have long been asking, like, do Ukrainians prepare to defend Pokrovsk? Like, how easy it's going to be for Russians to take it? Not easy. Like, not easy at all. As you can see, it's a defense line. It's completely underground. It has forward-facing positions with wires and anti-tank blocks. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things that we don't see on this picture at all, but it's just there to show you that Ukrainians are not just like falling back without a fight. And if Russians want to even consider moving somewhere further, they will have a tough fight ahead of them. Again, let's look at this one. This is not going to get better for Russians. It's only going to get worse. And we see it's getting worse because just look at these videos. We talked about extensively about the state of the Russian military. Now they are pulling like these, I believe someone says these are like command cars for some of the artillery units. Like this is like from the garbage dump of the garbage dumps of the century has been pulled. We've talked extensively about the fact that Russian stockpiles are being emptied. What I want to underscore is that while they're being emptied of the most important working stuff, there's still stuff like this left, which, like, it's a very questionable whether this can be considered like an armored vehicle at all, but it drives, right? So the fact that they're emptying their stockpiles doesn't mean that they are completely running out of vehicles on the front line yet. We still need to get through 2025. Everything will be kind of decided by the end of the year, and we will see where Russia is going to be. We also see more Frankenstein monsters. So because Russian Black Sea Fleet is not operational anymore, so they're taking stuff from the fleet and they're putting the ship turret on top of a truck just to drive around with a ship turret, because why not? And then your favorite thing that I know you love to see is how are donkeys doing on the front lines? And was it like a single example that we saw of donkeys? And the answer is, of course, not. They are over prevalent. This is now super common practice for Russia. Again, if Ukraine would use donkeys, I would not say a word. Ukraine is trying to survive. They're fighting for their survival. But this is a country that supposedly was ready to fight the whole world. And this is what they've turned themselves into right now in 2 years in Ukraine. That doesn't mean that we need to get completely complacent, that everyone is stating that we will have to fight with Russia if they fail in Ukraine. You think that it's like, well, they're now having donkeys, how they can be prepared to fight us? Well, you need to understand that if Russia wins in Ukraine or gets some kind of relief, what they will do instantly is they will start working with their partners to make sure that they will not end up in this situation like this. Because believe me, they're not pulling these donkeys out because of the good life. And they understand that how they will end up in the situation once again if they need to. And they will learn from this. And next time when they're going to come for us and they're going to come and try to destroy our cities, not just Ukrainians, at that moment, we will have to fight a lot more prepared Russians. And we are still not ready. We are still not taking the responsibility to the fullest extent. What we need to understand is that while this is where Russia is right now, it's our point right now to see just how weak the Russia is, that they are forced to use donkeys and horses. And we need to strike right now. When the enemy is weak, it's not time to negotiate. It's time to kick and finish them off so they never even think of coming back ever again. And then I have a very special message for you guys. I have been reached out to by the Technology Community United Group. These are the non-profit volunteer engineers, scientists, and technology professionals that are working their asses off to develop new technologies for the Ukrainian armed forces. The stuff that these guys have shown me, like off the book stuff that I cannot even talk about, is incredible. It's like mind-blowing technology. And so my call is, and their call as well, is basically spread the word. If you are an engineer, if you are a scientist or a technology expert, anything, check out their website, go in, fill in the form, and join if you have the time and desire and participate in this effort. This is the group that created a lot of groundbreaking technologies that allowed Ukraine to sustain in the fight. And what they're showing us right now, if there's more people that are supporting them and working with them, this honestly can change the war, guys. So participate, join up if you have the skills. I definitely don't, but they said that we can create like a special team for you called the Ukraine Matters Development Team. Just come into them, write that you want to be part of the Ukraine Matters team if you want, and let's do it. Let's make it happen. Absolutely fabulous stuff. And finally, guys, if you are like me, you're not a technology expert, but you still want to support Ukraine, first and foremost, if you don't have disposable income and you still support Ukraine and you're still just sharing and subscribing to this channel, which helps this channel a lot, and you're spreading the words at supporting Ukraine, thank you so much. This is worth all of the effort. But if you have some disposable income, please consider participating in a fundraiser for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. We're doing really, really well to get the trucks to the Ukrainian Armed Forces. We are past 174 and almost 500, and we are getting closer and closer to our goal of 250. Participate in this. Don't lose trust in Ukraine. Support Ukraine with what you have, and we're gonna help Ukraine win. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.